Nausea and dizziness are more of the ones that patients get scared from, especially the dizziness. And if it goes for a week or two, it's even more prevalent that patients will discontinue. And also the pain effects seem to be greater when it's used, consistently rather than that initial phase.
Welcome back, every bendy body, to the Bendy Bodies podcast with your host and founder, Dr. Linda Bluestein, the Hypermobility MD. I'm really excited to bring to you today Isabelle Ramirez Burnett. She is the CEO of Renegade Research, a patient-led, decentralized nonprofit focusing on research, clinical education, and practical advice around complex multi-system chronic conditions such as ME, CFS, and long COVID. Isabelle is also the project director for their largest to-date research project, Remission Biome. She is a systems engineer and board-certified health coach who started her career in the pharmaceutical and medical devices industry. She has been living with ME/CFS for 43 years, which derailed her intentions to become a doctor, but her own illness and passion for science has led her to work across multiple health-related disciplines and companies. I am really excited to have this conversation today because ME/CFS is such a poorly understood condition and so frequently missed. It affects so many people that have hypermobility and related conditions, so this is going to be an important conversation. As always, this information is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for personalized medical advice. Stick around until the very end so you don't miss any of our special hypermobility hacks. Here we go. Okay, we are here with Isabelle Ramirez Burnett, and I'm so excited to chat with you. I think our paths have crossed a number of different times in some different places, but I think this is the first time I've gotten to actually really chat with you.
Yes, we have crossed paths in the EDS world before, for sure.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So can you share with us how ME/CFS has impacted your daily life, your relationships, your ability to work and pursue hobbies, and how you got into this space in the first place?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I
Yeah.
have had ME/CFS for 43 years, so it has impacted most of my life. And even before developing a full-fledged ME/CFS, there were actually signs and symptoms of EDS that also impacted me. So I developed ME/CFS at the age of 7, and that was
Wow.
after having shingles at the age of 7, after having chickenpox at the age of 2. So the impact in my earlier years were, I guess I could say, less than they were as an adult. Because I was very fortunate to grow up with my grandmother, who was incredibly knowledgeable about herbal treatments, who pursued clinicians relentlessly, and who also believed me whenever I explained, the symptoms that I had and what I could and could not do. So that she was able to modify my diet. She was able to, get me on herbal supplements. She was able to seek care and not take no for an answer when I was growing up. And I was also fortunate that in school, there was also a very open atmosphere of understanding any limitations. So, for example, I had the same PE teacher from the 3rd grade until the end of high school.
Wow.
And when I told him that I couldn't shoot the basketball because I couldn't look up, he was perfectly fine and made accommodations for that. When I couldn't run the mile, he made accommodations for that and had me do other things. So way before there were, systems in place for that to happen. So I recognized that, growing up, my experience was very different than a lot of people with this condition. Whether it is because of the lack of clinical care or because of the lack of understanding for family members, that's not something that I experienced growing up. But with that said, there were definitely, challenges. The challenges in school, being able to keep up with my peers, being able to do things on weekends after, having ME/CFS symptoms and having to deal with those challenges for the entire week at full force had definitely an impact. And then at the age of 12, I had measles and I was hospitalized for a month,
Ooh.
nearly died. And then when I finally got back home, I fell down the stairs. And I think that's when a lot of the hypermobility issues became much worse. The neck was terrible, the back pain, etc. So, but again, from the age of 12 to when I got married at 19, my grandmother was taking care of me, and it was just a very different experience, and the accommodations that I had were great. Things changed and took a turn for the very worse when I moved to the United States at the age of almost 21. So
Mm.
I share that I got married at 19. We had our first child, and my husband is from the US. We met in the Dominican, got married, had our first child, and then moved here. Um, and the difference in the impact that this condition had in my life, moving forward, was just really, really detrimental.
Mm.
Not only did my symptoms get worse, because, now I don't have somebody that is taking care of me and understanding how to deal with my symptoms and seeking clinical care, but seeking clinical care myself was incredibly challenged. As there are no tests. It was diagnosis was again, a huge challenge then, and a lot of clinicians assume that this is psychosomatic. A woman, you have pain everywhere. You say that you're incredibly fatigued. So it affected my marriage. It affected, my ability to care for my children. It affected employment many times. I would go on cycles of, being able to do things, and then, over exerting myself and my energy envelope time after time after time, going into a decline, and, having to be housebound, bedbound for weeks or months at a time. And that lasted until I was diagnosed with Chiari malformation in 2015. And that diagnosis, what it allowed me to do was to be believed, not just in the clinical setting, but, extended family and other extended relationships, to where there's a concrete thing that you can put a finger to and say, this is what my symptoms are due to. And then the landscape, changed again from that perspective.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing how when we can see something on imaging, or there's a lab test or something, it's so much more often people are believed as compared to when they're. It's like you're, I hate to say it, but like guilty until proven innocent. Like you're like making it up until they can like almost prove that you're not making it up, which obviously is not the way it should be, because we know that our lab tests and our imaging are far far from perfect. But I want to come back to a couple of things that you said that I thought were really interesting. So, age 7, first of all, that is really really young, of course, for the onset of all of this. And also about the Dominican, that you grew up in the Dominican, and that the care in the U.S. has been. I wasn't sure if it's been less optimal for you, or if it's been how healthcare has evolved, or your particular support that you had in the Dominican as compared to here. But it's really helpful information, because I only know how the U.S. healthcare system works, and I know how that works very very well, because I've been working within it for several decades now, but I don't know how other healthcare systems work. So if you have any insights about how healthcare in the Dominican is, I'd be interested to hear them.
Yeah, so the biggest difference, I guess, with healthcare in the Dominican is that people are not as easily dismissed when there are no answers that are obvious, whether from a test or radiology or, explanations that clinicians can come by. There's also a much bigger integration between what you called, I guess, natural remedies like herbs and supportive therapies and pharmaceuticals. And there is more collaboration with family members. So, my grandmother would pursue things relentlessly, but it's not because she was being pushed away, but it was because a doctor would tell her, this is where we are. I don't see anything else that I can do besides what you are already doing. So I'm happy to prescribe this or that, or, tell you to continue to do this or that. But there's isn't really much further that I can go. We understand that she's having these symptoms, but we can't understand the why. But there wasn't at any point the insinuation that this was all in my head. She was encouraged to pursue it and, giving all of the therapies that a clinician would have from their toolbox until they couldn't do that anymore. Yeah.
That's really good to know, because obviously it's a huge challenge here in the US, people being believed and supported in the medical community. And it's really, really frustrating. And it sounds like you have experienced those challenges since you came here.
Yes, absolutely. I was the first couple of clinicians that I saw, it was a terrible experience. Again, it's in your head, there's nothing that we can see. Everything looks perfectly fine. I was fortunate enough about 2 years in to find a much older clinician who was, again, integrative and did additional testing and gave me additional support. Unfortunately, that clinician retired about a year and a half into my care. But it gave me the foundation on top of what I had from my grandmother. And on top of the, scientific literature that I had at that point, to be a lot more involved in my own care and to now become a little bit more of my grandma, although with far less success because there was no, pushing a lot of the clinicians to be my own advocate, for the rest of the time, to do a lot of my research, to try different things, to go to a rheumatologist if my primary care physician was not going far enough, was not, investigating, was not willing to try certain therapies. And to, at times, go even back to the Dominican and see a doctor there that would,
Really?
help me. Yes, absolutely. And it's something that a lot of immigrants do. A lot of the times it's due to the cost. But a lot of it is also due to the fact that you will have that support, that clinicians will work with you and try to, refer you or look for alternatives or, find solutions. If you bring them a study and say, this is what's being done, they're willing to prescribe things off label a lot more often than clinicians here are.
That is really fascinating. Of course, there are people who travel to different countries for medical care for different reasons. And so sometimes it might be plastic surgery because it's a lot less expensive and you're paying out of pocket. Or, if it's a nationalized healthcare system and they can get in for surgery quicker here in the US because they're, maybe paying out of pocket or something. But what you just shared is the first time I've ever heard of someone going, from the US to the Dominican for what sounds like medical care. It's not surgery. I feel like a lot of the cases are surgical.
Yeah, the medical care there is actually outstanding if you have the money to pay for it. And in dollars to pesos, which is the currency, can go a very long way. So that's part of the reason why people go. A lot of people travel. A lot of Dominicans will travel back to the Dominican for a couple of months at a time so they can take care of all their medical, dental, and everything that they need for the year.
Okay.
Because even with insurance, it can turn out to be cheaper and much more comprehensive.
Don't even get me started on insurance and all the problems. I pay so much for my policy, and oh my gosh, it doesn't even cover like so many things that I end up paying, completely separately for. But anyway, we'll save that for another time because we would get really really off track. Okay, so what inspired you to become an advocate for ME/CFS patients?
Definitely my own challenges.
Hmm.
That was, at the forefront of um, my inspiration for doing this because I saw how hard it was. A lot of the times that I was working, I was a pharmaceutical sales rep, right? And I would go into doctors' offices to discuss my products, and I would be talking to a physician about the products, or about health in general, about a certain condition. And you don't want to know how many times this clinician would say that fibromyalgia, uh, ME/CFS, a number of conditions were all in your head.
Hmm.
While at the same time, I am, standing in front of this physician, feeling like I'm going to collapse any minute, having to go to my car and rest and take, things in between visits just in order to keep my job, right?
Right.
Um, and if there's something that I'm very guilty of is being like way too bubbly and overly optimistic when I shouldn't be, and to have somebody tell me to my face that everything that I'm feeling in my body is not real, and it's because I'm causing myself, to do that, is incredibly frustrating.
Hmm.
And with working in the pharmaceutical industry and my own, inspiration for learning more, um, I can read scientific studies. I can, discern information, and I know that a lot of people can't or don't even want to. We have to become our own quote unquote doctors to bring solutions to ourselves. Um, and and seeing how complex navigating all of that was, for someone who enjoys it, for someone who can understand it. And how difficult it is to pinpoint what works for one person. I wanted to help others who didn't have the background and the affinity for this than
Hmm.
than I have, and didn't have the support from families. In addition to my grandmother, I've had a very supporting husband and the rest of my family as well. And I know that people just don't have that. So being able to advocate for those who can't do it has become my life mission.
What are the most common misconceptions do you think about ME/CFS, and how do you address them when you are advocating?
The most common misconception, I think, is the part of the chronic fatigue syndrome, right? We all get fatigued, and people get, tired. Whether it is some people get more tired than others, right? You may have more stamina or less.
Mhm.
And there is a misconception that chronic fatigue syndrome is just fatigue, which is very, very different than just fatigue. It's
Mhm.
like you have a battery that just doesn't charge. And it doesn't matter how much you will yourself to do something, or how much desire you have to do something. It's like there's an invisible wall in front of you that keeps you from doing it. Body wise, it's not a mental block. Is a lack of energy that is way disproportionate to whatever it is that you are doing. So for some people, it may be that in order to get through a day of work, you have to go home and sleep for the rest of the night, which I did many, many days, or you have
Mm.
to rest for the entire weekend. And you have no other social life or no other things that you can do just to maintain employment. While for other people who are on the more severe end of the spectrum, you may get incredibly sick just from going to the bathroom, right? That's all the battery that you have. And then Another common misconception is how much that can fluctuate within one person from periods of time or even within the same day. For many years, I had a code word with my husband, which is I hit the wall, right? And it's that point in which my battery has completely shut down and I can't do anything else. And he understands that. But to see somebody that is maybe just, having dinner or cooking dinner or doing something else, and all of a sudden your battery just dies, it's just very hard to understand. There's a lot of heterogeneity to the condition. So some people may present the quote unquote fatigue is common to a lot of people, but some people have pain. Some people have chronic migraines. Other people have intolerance to sounds and lights. There is so much variation in the multitude of symptoms and the comorbidities from one patient to the next. But the most important thing is that the fatigue is not just a common fatigue. It is a true draining of, your life force and your battery that you just can't will it to replenish, by yourself.
Yeah, and we just recently spoke with Dr. Yelman, and I definitely want people to go listen to that episode as well, because he gave a very elaborate explanation of post-exertional malaise. And, your explanation was so great, because I think you're right. I think for people who have not ever experienced this, they really have a hard time wrapping their heads around what it must be like to have that extreme intolerance of activity, being upright, and especially, like you said, given that it varies from day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour. I think a lot of clinicians, it's very, very hard for them to understand conditions that vary that much. Kind of, I feel like scientifically, they feel like that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? So so therefore it must not be true what you're telling me.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to Dr. Yelman. Absolutely love him as a clinician. If you don't mind, I'll also give a plug for the Remission Biome YouTube channel, and he has a presentation there that was absolutely fantastic as well.
Yes, absolutely. And we are definitely going to talk about remission biome later on, because I definitely want to dig into that and understand more about what you all are doing there. I think it's wonderful. And yeah, he was such a great guest as well. Got such wonderful information. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this episode, if they haven't already listened to that episode, are going to definitely want to go check that one out as well. So we'll link that in the show notes too, so people can find that easily. So if people are listening to this and they're like, gosh, I do know somebody who has ME/CFS, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a family member, how can they best support that person?
I think that the most important part of the support is to understand that what you see is not what that patient is necessarily feeling. There isn't always an outward visible manifestation of the conditions. You don't see a fever. You may not see, sweats. You may not see somebody outwardly collapse, right? But when a patient is telling you how they feel, believe them, because it is just, there are no words to explain the things that go on within your body. It's like when you're standing in front of the refrigerator just looking for a snack, and you feel like gravity is 100 times more than it normally is, because your body, the orthostatic intolerance is hitting you. There is no way to see that. There's no way to see pain, and chronic pain patients hide it very well. People say I don't have tolerance to pain, and I think it's the complete opposite. There's a high tolerance to pain, because to live with it, on a daily basis, shows that you have a high tolerance. There's so many symptoms that just don't have an outward manifestation. So the best way to support somebody is to understand that they're not making up what they're telling you. It's true. And the other thing is to ask the patients how they need that support, not to assume, and provide the solutions that you think would fit if you were in that position, but to ask the patient, how can I support you? What can I do now for you? What can I do later? Whatever the availability it is that you have to support that patient, ask the patient how that can be accomplished best, and that's how you'd be able to help the most.
Yeah, that's a good point because I think we often don't think to ask the person, how can I help you? And maybe even because of the fact that there's often cognitive challenges as well, brain fog and things like that, which we've talked about multiple times on the podcast. Maybe also to, maybe asking, how can I help you? But also then giving some specific examples. Would it be helpful if I bring over some food? And if so, what kind of restrictions do you have? Would it be helpful if I drove you to a doctor's appointment or, give, like they say, if you're trying to help a friend who has cancer, don't just say, how can I help? But giving something specific, I think really shows that you really do want to help. So it's hard. It's hard to ask for help, right? I think as patients, people are, maybe they're with their very, very closest family, but even sometimes then it's hard to ask for what we need. I think that's I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with. What advice would you give to newly diagnosed patients about navigating the healthcare system?
Newly diagnosed patients, I'd say, even before navigating the healthcare system, is plug into the patient community.
Mhm.
Um, but also do so understanding that you have your own agency, right? One of the biggest challenges that we have is that we don't have a lot of clinicians like yourself and Dr. Yelman that understand this condition and that take a lot of time with patients and that are willing to try different things and know, what set of tests to order to keep digging for potential solutions. Um, so plug into the greater community to understand all of the routes that people go through. And the other advice that I would have is start documenting your symptoms and your results as soon as you can, to the extent that you can. And this is where a friend or a family member, may be most helpful if that's a challenge for you, because it's very difficult to recognize the little improvements that you may have when you introduce or remove something, the 2%, the 5%, because it gets very lost in the noise of everything else that you're
Mhm.
dealing with. So if you're documenting, tracking as much as possible, wearing wearables and seeing how that changes from day to day. What does your wearable look like when you feel your best and when you feel your worst? Um, does anything change when you start a new medication or a new supplement? Does anything change when you, let's say, spend 2 hours on Zoom? Keep track of those things so you can understand and make informed decisions about your body. And the other thing is that something that perhaps didn't work at one point because of the conditions of your body at that time doesn't necessarily mean that it won't be helpful at a later time when those barriers have been removed. And that's another aspect where tracking really helps. So you can see any correlations and you can start making assessments of how to move forward um, with your clinician. The other thing would be to continue to seek out, if not expert clinicians, at least the ones who are open to working with you, whether it is open to you bringing them, the latest studies or bringing them anecdotes of things that have worked for other patients, whatever the case may be. You don't have to be stuck with one clinician. If one doesn't work, you can seek others. and find the ones who are willing to work with you, even if they don't understand fully what is going on.
Yeah, I love that because I do often encourage people that if they see a clinician who's open-minded and curious, and empathetic, that can be just as valuable or almost as valuable as someone who has expertise in your condition, depending on what you need at that point in time. So those are really important features to be looking for. And I also love how you pointed out about tracking your symptoms and really paying attention also to improvements. I know even myself, like I think I tend to, really notice if things are not as good, if I have more pain or, something's not as good as normal. But then when something gets better, I feel like we often miss it because, we're kind of, it's very easy to take it for granted if things are starting to get a little bit better. So I think that's an excellent suggestion because if you have changed something and then things are getting a little bit better, that's important information that as a clinician, I always want to know. And I even find when I go to my doctor's appointments, I go to a doctor for my TMD. That's probably the most like routine follow-up that I have. And she'll ask me all these questions and I never know the answer. I'm like such a terrible patient in that regard because I'll be like, I don't know, but we really should try to pay attention to those things because that's important data for them to go off of to, make future plans for our treatment plans and everything. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about what Isabelle has found most helpful in her care and also about the different nonprofit organizations that she's working with and what patients can do to get the best possible treatment. So we'll be right back. This episode of the Bendy Bodies podcast is brought to you by EDS Guardians, paying it forward in the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes community, patient to patient for the common good. I am proud to serve on the inaugural board of directors for EDS Guardians, a small charity with a big mission and a big heart. Now seeking donors, volunteers, and partners. Patient advocacy and support programs available now. Travel grants launching in 2025. Learn more, shop for a cause at their swag store, and join the revolution at edsguardians.org. Thank you so much for listening to Bendy Bodies. We really appreciate your support. It really helps the podcast when you like, subscribe, and comment on YouTube, and follow, rate, and review on all audio platforms. This helps us reach so many more people and spread the information to everyone. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of the episode. Okay, we are back with Isabelle, and I would love to know what role you think doctors and healthcare providers should play in improving the experience of ME/CFS patients.
Ooh, it's a huge challenge, and I understand it is for clinicians because of the structure of our healthcare system, right? We are in a system where 15 minutes, if that, is what's common. And in this type of condition where it's complex and it's multi-systemic, 15 minutes just doesn't cut it
Right.
to understand, where the patient is coming from. I think the biggest thing that clinicians can do to work within the constraints of the system that we have is to remain on top of the knowledge and the education and the research that exists, and to also plug into the patient community. Um, the doctors who are doing that, are so much more armed to help patients, no matter what those constraints are. So that's where clinicians can really help. There's education out there. Our organization puts out, expert clinicians, roundtables that are free and available to everyone. There are many organizations that are, putting out education. There are clinicians who are willing to mentor others and to share that information that can help expedite things and to try things with patients. And then understand that, even though you have the scientific knowledge and you are the clinician, the patient is the one having the lived experience of this condition. So when you partner up as a clinician, there is a much greater chance of success. And I think that, clinicians want to have that for themselves and for their practice. So those are the type of things that can be done. There's also private clinicians who don't take insurance. I know it's limited to people who can pay, but it also sort of decongests the burden on the rest of the population that does have to stay within the insurance system. So I don't see that as a negative because of that. The more clinicians that can do care in whatever capacity they can do it, I think it's a plus for the community. But in whatever system you are, just understand that the patient is your partner. Don't be paternalistic and flaunt your credentials to dismiss what the patient is telling you. Keep up with the literature, and bring the empathy first and foremost before even bringing the knowledge. There's I guess the trope out there that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and
Yeah.
that's no different for a patient. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that saying. And I also really appreciate how you're talking about, feeling the symptoms, because that's the other thing is I only know what my body feels like. You know what your body feels like. I don't know what your body feels like. The patients that I have even seen for the longest and I have the deepest relationship with, I mean, I hear what they're telling me, but I've never lived in their body. So, the lived experience is so important, and I think it's so important to
Everybody,
respect that.
everybody
And
will
I
get
I
you.
really love all those um, commentaries and thoughts that you're sharing. What about how patients are can be most empowered if they don't have a clinician or a team who really understands the complexity of their condition?
Benefit one patient can be a huge detriment to another. Something that a patient may be able to take 50,000 IUs of vitamin D. Another one just does terrible with 500. So there's a lot of variation in there. Um, Patients themselves, again, plugging into the patient community, staying informed, doing as many tests as you can possibly afford so you can understand and have a compilation of where you sit, where your biochemistry is really helpful. There are sometimes clinicians that even though they're not doing, they're not being your doctor online, though they can tell you, okay, this means this, and then you can, go from there and do whatever you can with that information. So there are those things that patients can do. If you have any inclination for reading, study after study, definitely do that because that is incredibly helpful.
Mhm.
Understand what is being prescribed to other patients that are most like you. And that can be very helpful. What's being done in other countries is also very helpful.
Mhm.
And then, like I said before, don't feel like you have to stay with the clinician that you are with if they are not at least open to discussions and, helping you and being and receiving the information that you are provided. Continue to search until you find that clinician that will work with you and try to help you at least.
Do you have tips for, let's say somebody, does read a study online or comes across a journal article or something and or talks to other people in the community and they decide that they want to try a certain medication or supplement. Do you have tips for how that person can bring that up to the clinician in a way that's more likely to be received well?
That's a great question. I mean, you have to assess that relationship first, right?
Mhm.
If you brought an article to your provider and the first thing that they say is the internet is not a doctor, then it's not they're not going to receive anything well. Um, However, it may be presented from the perspective of, oh, my friend or somebody that has a lot of the same symptoms that I do is taking this. Is this something that we could try? So saying it in a way that doesn't feel threatened if the
Mm-hmm.
relationship is not great. Um, if you can develop that relationship, then that might be what comes first before you can move forward and be a resource for your provider. You have to understand the clinician that you're working with to know how much input they're willing to accept from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you pointed out earlier, hopefully you have a sense that you're on the same team. Unfortunately, sometimes I feel like, it we're it, we get the definite vibe in the room that we're not on the same team, and so that can be a big problem. So, if you do have that kind of relationship, I think it's going to be so much better received than if it's a more antagonistic relationship or just, not something that's a good collaboration, because you want these decisions, like you said, they should not be paternalistic. It should be what's called shared decision making. So together, there should be a conversation, and well, here's some of the options, and here's some things that we can do. And speaking of some of the things that we can do, are you willing to share anything about how you manage symptoms on a day-to-day basis? Like, I don't know how much post-exertional malaise or chronic pain or anything like that you have, but are there certain things that you've been able to do in order to manage those symptoms?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in 47 years dealing with this condition, there is a lot that I have tried and a
Mhm,
lot that I have learned, right? So I take two main medications, which are unfortunately very stigmatized. One is a pain medication, tramadol, and the other one is a stimulant, Concerta. I also have narcolepsy, so the Concerta was, prescribed for that.
mhm,
Um, and in doing my own research and realizing, tramadol, for example, it doesn't just help with pain. I've known for a long time it helps with the fatigue, it helps with the fog, and it also helps with PEM. We did a project in which we measured lactate with lactate measuring devices. And I can see the lactate rising when I'm in PEM to ridiculous levels, and how
mm,
after taking tramadol, it goes back down to normal levels.
mm,
And there's actually a recent article of tramadol and COVID that
mhm,
shows the different mechanisms and how many things it helps. It helps with inflammatory cytokines. It helps with ROS. I mean, it's just um, another. I don't want to call it failure, but another shortcoming, if you will, of the medical system that we have is that we get a medication that gets approved for a particular indication, and that's where it stops for the most part. When one medication can have so many different mechanisms of action, sometimes we do get the few that are prescribed for one thing or and another that got accidentally discovered as a side effect, but that's not often, right? So we definitely need a system of reusing medications that are already on the market for all of the conditions that we have, and doing better research in that area. So tramadol is one that helps me. I would say it's probably responsible for maybe 40% of my function,
mm,
which is huge.
mhm,
And then on the Concerta side, even though I take it for narcolepsy, when there have been shortages and I have been without it for many days, I realized how much it impacts my orthostatic intolerance,
mm,
how much it helps it, right? And we had a roundtable recently with Dr. Rowe. And I asked that question, and he was like, "Yeah, we use it with patients for orthostatic intolerance because for a lot of patients, it's a great solution." So I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who's seeing that. Um, and then besides those two, there are things that I use, whether it is continuously or periodically. to address, a baseline decrease or certain symptoms, things like NAC. I have, B vitamins that are on all the time. I have my EPA, DHA. There's a number of supplements that I use, whether it is ongoing or I pulse them or I have them on hand for when certain symptoms, do happen to come on. And then one of the things that has had a huge impact, you mentioned earlier, we got talking about remission biome and is, doing that protocol, which we are still studying. And that gave me a period of about 9 months where my baseline was the best that it has been, for almost any time. The only other time that I had a similar baseline increase was, again, with antimicrobials when I had Lyme. Which also affected, a period of time post the treatment where my baseline was nearly healthy, with a lot of symptoms decreased, and just being able to function even better than a healthy person a lot of the time. But it's hard to. This is one of the places where it's the hardest to be prescriptive because a combination of different things. We don't have a cure, right? But we are seeing that what affects function and even symptoms to sometimes a lesser degree. But if the function is there, then the symptoms can be better managed and overlooked. But what works is a combination of different things for different people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely one thing that I've learned in my practice is there's nothing that works for everyone. So that really does make life challenging. And I did want to come back to a few of the acronyms that you threw out because people might be, wait, what was that? So EPA and DHA, those are omega-3 fatty acids. NAC is N-acetylcysteine. ROS is reactive oxidative species. Okay. And then also I wanted to comment about the tramadol because that is really interesting. I actually had a patient very recently share that journal article with me, and I have to confess I had not seen it. And it was quite interesting. And as a prescriber, one of my biggest concerns with opioids, and tramadol, I should point out, was not originally classified as an opioid. It was classified as an opioid later on, and I don't know what year that was, but it started out being classified as kind of a mixed agent because it does have some like SSRI or antidepressant type effects acting on the serotonin system, as well as having action on the mu opioid receptor. So I thought that study was really, really interesting. One of my biggest concerns as a prescriber is, are we going to get into a situation where we need to escalate the dose? Do you mind sharing if you've been able to be on a stable dose for an extended period of time?
Yeah, so I've been taking it for 24 years
Oh,
now.
wow.
And my dose was much higher when I was at my worst, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a higher dose has lesser of an impact. The more severe a patient is. It is a synthetic opioid, and it got scheduled. I think it was in 2014, somewhere in there. I was actually a rep for Johnson and Johnson when I
Oh, were you
started
really?
taking tramadol. Yes, and that's why I started. I asked my doctor to prescribe it because I understood so much about how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is a synthetic opioid. The data shows that the addiction rate is so much lower. I think it's 1 in 100,000 patients, and about 90% of those patients have a history of addiction. Um, and the dose, can definitely be managed for most people without any withdrawal effects when you are up and down in your baseline, right? So at one point, I took the max dose, which is very far from where I am right now.
Mm-hmm.
And even, on my better days, I'll skip it or skip a dose or, whatever the case may be. I know people take it intermittently. I have a friend, for example, that takes it when she needs to go to doctor's appointments, or wants to, if she's having family over and wants to be able to participate in activities, she'll take it then. I know a lot of fibromyalgia patients take it because it is indicated for pain, and that's in fibromyalgia, pain is a much more prevalent than it is in ME/CFS. So it is something that the patients understand, that it's having a much greater impact than just affecting pain. But again, the studies haven't been done. It's not widely used. It is very stigmatized because it is now, classified as a controlled substance. Doctors don't want to prescribe it because they're afraid that a patient is going to get addicted. So there are many barriers to it, despite how much it can do for a patient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, and the other challenge is, and this is something I know from my pharma days, is that the effect of it is very different from using it acutely than using it chronically, right? And if it's not titrated correctly, patients can get dissuaded from using it because of the transient side effects. And that's something that was very frustrating as a pharmaceutical rep, was that, even though I've repeated it time after time after time, the titration just wouldn't be done. And then patients would get scared because of those initial side effects.
And when you're talking about initial side effects, you're talking about constipation, nausea.
Nausea and dizziness are more of the ones that patients get scared from, especially the dizziness. And if it goes for a week or two, it's even more prevalent that patients will discontinue. And also the pain effects seem to be greater when it's used, consistently, rather than that initial phase. So if the pain is not being, very well controlled, and then you're getting nausea and getting dizzy, that's, definitely a reason for discontinuing. If you don't know that, that those are transient side effects, and that they could have been altogether avoided just by titrating slowly, especially in this patient population.
Yeah, it can be hard to know sometimes when to persist with something and when to either back off. And I ask people all the time to give us another trial of medications, because sometimes the way it was tried the first time, it was, like you said, started at too high of a dose, or maybe it was an excipient problem or something like that. I will be sure to link that article in the show notes so people can read that about tramadol and long COVID. So I think people would find that interesting. And what about self-care? What do you think are some good self-care things for people with ME/CFS?
I think that for self-care, some of the most important things is having a supportive community, whether that's your family, your friends. If you live alone, the people that you have the most contact with, that understand when you are down, the things that you cannot do, because a lot of stress comes from wanting to do something, right? You don't feel well the moment that that event comes up, even if it is a phone call with a friend, and then you feel like you're disappointing your friend and they don't understand, or your family member, that at that moment you cannot do that. So having that closeness, and having a group of people that understand, what it is to have this condition, I think is important. And then easier said than done is to ditch the feelings of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's bad enough that you have to live with the physiological symptoms and consequences of the condition, but then the feelings of guilt for not being able to do things that you wanted to do, or other people expected you to do. And again, easier said than done, that pacing, resting when you need to, not overburdening yourself with things that don't need to get done. And then the other things is, if you can go out of the house or afford it, things that are supplemental benefits, going for a massage if you can, or lymphatic massage is usually very helpful for people. Um, Going for red light therapy, going to do something you enjoy if you can, when you can, building those things. I know I've heard from so many people, it's like, I feel guilty if I go out with a friend because I haven't done the things in my house that I need to do, or have not done this for my children, or whatever the case may be. And this condition is enough of a burden to keep accumulating more on top of it.
Yeah, and I think so often we forget about the things that bring us joy because, well, we can't do them in the way that we could do them before. And so we, I think, often don't have anything really that we enjoy doing. So I think if you can do something, even if it's you're doing it in a different way, maybe you used to do some other form of art, but now, you can't, you can maybe draw for just a very short period of time, but at least maybe if you can tap into something like that you used to like doing, I think that can be helpful also.
Absolutely.
What about the overlap between long COVID and ME/CFS? How do you think that has influenced awareness or research into these conditions?
Oh, that's a great question. ME/CFS has been a very neglected condition for, decades.
Yeah.
Whether it is from the clinical or the research perspective. Again, the fact that there are no diagnostic tests, there are no treatments, no approved treatments. You don't wear the condition on your face. And you don't always know when it happens, right? For a lot of us, it is infection trigger, but the onset can be, weeks to a month, or even more from when that infection happens. So people don't even necessarily correlate it. And I think what several of the things, unfortunately, because the fact that this happened is very unfortunate for long COVID, is that we saw the consequences, in a massive amount of people at once. The presentation is very similar, with the variability in severity, of course, to ME/CFS. The statistics vary, but the most common cited ones is that 50% of long COVID patients meet the criteria for ME/CFS. The rest have different subtypes of long COVID, where it's neuro COVID, or cardio COVID, or the POTS, the autonomic presentation, that don't meet the full criteria for ME/CFS is very different. But there's a very large group that does. And I think that for clinicians, researchers, and the community at large, having such a large number of people, that have had the onset of long COVID as a consequence of COVID, has been, eye-opening for everybody. With that said, even though there is a lot of overlap between the two conditions, I think that it is important that we go on to study the differences, and understand better whether different pathogens can trigger different types of ME/CFS, and all of the nuances that go into the two. Whether the presentation is different closer to the onset versus, those of us who have had it for a long time. I think we have a huge opportunity for really diving deep into studying everything that happens from beginning to end, since we still, have COVID going on, and we can, prospectively study people who develop long COVID.
And I want to also circle back because I was making some notes, and then I got most things on the list, but I missed one. You mentioned, I think, when you were talking about the things that you have found most helpful with your symptoms, I think you might have mentioned something about a protocol that you're following. Did I catch that correctly?
Yeah. So I did not currently follow in, although I might do it again soon. The remission biome protocol is a protocol that got started on X because patients were discussing the science of ME/CFS and the things that had helped. But one of the things that was central to it was the fact that several patients had had remission events with antibiotics. And the most commonly used antibiotic was amoxicillin clavulanate. So to make a long story short, patients devise a protocol based on the science, based on what was understood about ME/CFS presentation and long COVID as well, and based on those experiences with antibiotics, in conjunction with their clinicians. And I was one of the first 3 patients who did the protocol back in March of 2023. And upon doing that protocol, I was, like I said before, I was just nearly the levels of a healthy person, for the following 9 months. And what sort of took me out of that baseline, although not back down to where I was before, was another infection in November of 2023. So upon that, we organized more formal patient-led research, self-experimentation type of study, where patients, in collaboration with their clinicians, would follow the protocol, and that is still ongoing. So that was initially a cohort of 50 patients. That again, it's still ongoing. We have learned so many lessons from it and modified as we go. But out of that, the organization Renegade Research was born, and Remission Biome is now the largest project of Renegade Research. And what Renegade Research does is a patient-led nonprofit organization that has 3 legs. One is agile patient-led research. One is education. We are doing the roundtables and actually developing an education platform that's going to be based on systems biology and biochemistry for clinicians to really understand all of the nuances and be able to devise, testing and treatments for their patients. And then the other leg of the organization is practical advocacy. Because what ends up happening with a lot of patients is, you lose your job because you can't work, right? And for a lot of people, they also lose their support, whether that be a spouse or a family who doesn't believe them. They lose social support. They may lose housing. So we're looking at seeing how do we connect those pieces so there is care at all levels, right? Because without those basics, if you don't have housing, if you don't have food, if you don't have the basic needs covered, looking for clinicians, without even having insurance to begin with is just not possible. And if you can't afford the medications or the supplements, you just can't follow through on that. So that's a critical foundation to being able to do the rest of the things. And then the recognition that clinicians are not necessarily understanding of what goes on with the condition, and a lot of clinicians want to, and may not have the time or the ability or know where to start to see what's the latest research, what are patients experiencing, what are other clinicians doing. So we're bringing that information to them. And then the agile research is doing pilots and proof of concept studies based on those experiences that are brought on by the patients of what's working for them, what are their observations, what are they tracking. that then we can aggregate all those N of ones, and pull all that data together, analyze it, and then, minimize the noise to see the signal, so larger studies can be done, and they can be done out of the things that have the potential to make a bigger difference in the quality of life of patients.
Yeah, that's really great because you can get some really interesting anecdotes, but then you don't know, does that extrapolate to a larger population? So that's wonderful that you're doing that. So we're going to need to wrap up, unfortunately. And I always end every episode, as you may know, with a hypermobility hack. Do you happen to have a hypermobility hack that you can share with us?
Oh, yes, I have a few.
Okay.
One of the simplest ones I like to share, if somebody can, of course, get on the floor, is how wonderful the floor can be for decompressing. Right, just laying on the floor by itself. Whether you can move your arms around you, you can move your back, you can, just provide that surface that kind of pushes against your structure, to be able to decompress, is something that can really help. If you can go, for example, against the wall and bring your legs up when your hips are out of place, that's something that can generally help. But another thing is, to the extent that is possible, is working on stability. Connective tissue needs to have the tensile strength in order to be able to hold your skeleton together, right? And for ME/CFS patients, exercise can be a big challenge, right? Depending on where you are. So disconnecting the concept of exercise with mobility in order to be able to do the things that can help that structure, that the integrity of the structure stay together. So whether that is, moving your arm in a certain direction, or it is just laying on the floor to decompress. And then another great source of things for hacking is Kevin Moldoni's book, Living Well with EDS, which is, applicable to a lot of people with hypermobility. If you have a PT, great. But if you don't, there are techniques in that book that can be really helpful for helping maintain that strength.
Some things that people can do on their own, even if they don't have a PT.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, very simple things that can be, implemented, like taking the palm of your head to your forehead and pressing softly, or pushing your shin back. If you have problems with your neck, those are very, very simple things that can be done. For the majority of people, even if your energy is extremely limited, that can help. With that integrity, and keep the pain at bay, and keep the hypermobility a little bit more keep your body together.
Keep it a little more well managed. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Isabelle. And it was great to chat with you. Before you go, can you let us know where we can find you?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this conversation. People can find me. I'm very active on X. I'm Isabelle Ramirez RD. And also posting a lot from our Renegade Research account, which is at Renegade RES, on X as well. If people have any questions, my email is isabelle@renegade-research.org.
Okay, wonderful. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I know ME/CFS is a condition that is so poorly misunderstood. And I feel like, a lot of people are probably undiagnosed, like with EDS, a lot of people undiagnosed, of course, and with dysautonomia, people have POTS that are, this podcast is to help people get the information that they need so that they can get better care. So I really appreciate you sharing all this information and all the work that you've been doing, and taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you very much as well.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Isabelle, and I hope you found it really helpful. I know so many people are suffering from ME/CFS and really struggle to get help. So I hope that you will investigate the nonprofit organization that she's involved with, and also check out episode 140 with Dr. Yelman, because that will also have lots of great tips for you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Bendy Bodies with the Hypermobility MD podcast. Help us spread the word about joint hypermobility and related disorders by leaving a review and sharing the podcast. This really helps raise awareness about these complex conditions. If you would like to dig deeper, you can meet with me one-on-one. Please check out the available options on my website at hypermobilitymd.com. You can also find me, Dr. Linda Bluestein, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, or LinkedIn at hypermobilitymd. You can find Human Content, my producing team, at Human Content Pods on TikTok and Instagram. You can also find full video episodes up every week on YouTube at Bendy Bodies Podcast. To learn about the Bendy Bodies program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification and licensing terms, and HIPAA release terms, or to reach out with any questions, please visit bendybodiespodcast.com. Bendy Bodies Podcast is a Human Content production. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we'll catch you next time on the Bendy Bodies Podcast. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. I love getting your feedback. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you will never miss an update. We've got plenty more exciting content coming your way. And if you're looking for more episodes, just click on one of the videos on the screen right now. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.